A woman's right to choose has been one of the main issues at the confirmation hearings for Judge Amy Coney Barrett this week. Democrats, they're very concerned, and it seems like they have a pretty good right to be. President Trump has specifically said he'd only nominate a justice who is pro-life, and Judge Coney Barrett has actually signed anti-abortion letters. But when asked about it by Democratic senators, she would not speak to how she would handle Roe if it came before the High Court.
Do you agree with Justice Scalia's view that Roe can and should be overturned by the Supreme Court?
That's a case that's litigated. It could, its contours could come up again. In fact, do come up. They came up last term before the court. But I can't express views on cases or pre-commit to approaching a case any particular way.
You said that Brown is, and I know my time is running out, is a super precedent. That's something the Supreme Court has not even said, but you have said that. So if you say that, why won't you say that about Roe v. Wade?
As Richard Fallon from Harvard said, Roe is not a super precedent because calls for its overruling have never ceased, but that doesn't mean that Roe should be overruled. It just means that it doesn't fall on the small handful of cases like Marbury versus Madison and Brown versus the board that no one questions anymore.
I want to bring in our guest, Nancy Northrup. She's president and CEO for the Center for Reproductive Rights. And Nancy, I know through many other confirmation hearings, we all try to divine where a particular nominee stands in an issue. We don't have to guess with this nominee where she falls on Roe. Regardless of how evasive she may be on the answering, she has signed letters outright saying that she believed it was wrongly decided. There's a legitimate reason to believe in a 6-3 court, I think for the first time in my lifetime, that Roe could literally go away.
Well, that's right. Judge Barrett has been very clear on the record about her opposition to the constitutional protection for the right to abortion. It's clear from the decisions that she's rendered as a Seventh Circuit judge. It's clear from her academic writings, and it's clear from her public advocacy. I mean, I think what's really different here from other nominees is she has been an advocate. She has signed on to advertisements which have talked about protecting the right to life from fertilization. That's not even pregnancy, that's fertilization. And also talked about, protecting in law the unborn. So those are legal positions, and they can't be separated to some category of kind of personal belief. She's been very clear about her legal positions. So it does not matter in the hearings that she describes cases or says, I can't give any hints or predictions. We don't need hints and predictions. She's very clear on the record that she does not believe that the right to abortion is protected in the U.S. Constitution.
Nancy, I think for casual observers, and I'm sure some folks in my audience, when you talk about Roe, they say, they try and chip away at the edges, whether it be to access or how late in the pregnancy it can be limited or impositions put on the mother. But I don't think people get their arms around the idea that Roe overall could go away. Do you believe that's what we're talking about? Or is it simply a more willing court to try and, basically put into law more of the restrictions that states are trying to find here and there?
Well, I think there's a real possibility of either. Again, Judge Barrett has been clear she doesn't think it's protected in the Constitution. And she's also been clear in her academic writings that she doesn't see Roe as any kind of super precedent that a judge should not consider revisiting, or a justice. And what people need to understand is that whether the court ever utters the words, we reverse Roe versus Wade, or whether they just allow restrictions to stand that have a devastating impact on access, the result is the same, which is that women in certain states will not be able to get access to abortion services and would have to leave their states. And in the recent cases in the Supreme Court, we just won, the Center for Reproductive Rights, a case in the Supreme Court in June of 2020, in which the state of Louisiana, if they had let their law go into effect, there would have only been one provider left in the entire state of Louisiana to serve a reproductive rights population of 1 million women. So it's a very real possibility And if Roe fell, the impact would be quite devastating, which is something that I think is being obscured in this hearing by the Republicans in their questions. But the Center for Reproductive Rights report, What If Roe Fell?, shows that 24 states are poised to recriminalize abortion if Roe versus Wade falls. And that means women in vast swaths of the country would have to travel quite far to get access to services.
To that end, it's not just abortion that could be on the docket. I know your organization looks at reproductive rights, contraception, for example. There's other things that maybe people take for granted right now that could be re-examined.
Well, absolutely. People have to understand that all of the access and decision-making about reproductive health care fall into this zone of, personal decision-making that the government can't enter. And that includes, contraception. It includes access to assisted reproduction technologies. I mean, one of the things very disturbing about Judge Barrett's view in law about the right to life from fertilization is it raises, enormous concerns about access to services like in vitro fertilization that many couples use to create families. So it's really an extreme position. We've never had a nominee who is as clear as she is on the record. And that's why there is great concern about her confirmation hearings right now.
I saw the organization said, I think a very good point, he said, outlawing abortion doesn't prevent it, it only makes it more dangerous. And statistically, the odds say that if, let's say, Roe did go away, one of those Republican senators would have one woman in their family, whether it be a daughter or spouse or a relative, that would seek an abortion at one point in their life. They most likely would be able to get on a plane if they lived in a state that didn't have it and go somewhere else that did, or even go abroad to have the procedure done. If you don't have money in this country, we really could be talking about the bad old days of backroom alleys and coat hangers and the rest. This is about economics as much as it is about for or against this, because options are not equal.
That is absolutely true. And the Center for Reproductive Rights works around the world, and it is true that women seek abortions, women seek to end pregnancies, whether it is legal or not legal. And that is true in the United States before Roe. It's true all over the world today. And what is so unfair is that it falls hardest, as you mentioned, on women of low income, women in rural communities. It falls harder on women in communities of color. And so this is not something that's going to fall evenly if Roe falls, but it's going to fall hardest on those who need the most, support and access. And so one of the reasons why it's important to have constitutional protections is so that your zip code doesn't determine, your income doesn't determine, your race doesn't determine whether you have access to these services. And that's what's on the line right now with this nomination.
Nancy Northup, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And coming up next, we will pivot to what else. With 20 days left in this presidential race here, we're going to be speaking with a number cruncher over at 538 for their election forecast. And I'll give you a hint, they don't think things look pretty good for Donald J. Trump.